So EO6 was already part of the original set of ecological objectives back in 2008, and it set out this key objective of seafloor integrity is maintained, especially in priority benthic habitats. And it kind of remained there for quite some years while the rest of the IMAP process was being developed. So by the time all the rest of the common indicators were adopted in 2016, the development of EO6 and EO4 on the food webs were not so far advanced, and it was decided at that stage to not include them within the 2016 IMAP. At that point, there was it was considered that there was insufficient development of the science behind these two EOs, lack of data, lack of monitoring and assessment approaches. So a good number of reasons why it wasn't adopted at that stage. But since 2016, we have come a long way, a very long way, really, in terms of the overall development, and it's now considered mature enough, and it was presented to the EcAP coordination group in September this year, and was approved at that stage, and I believe it will go forward now to the COP in Cairo in December for formal adoption. But before that, there was a series of developments over the years, starting in 2022 with the online working group on benthic habitats, which was a very good forum for getting the experts to have insight into the proposal. And then it's been through several of the CORMON meetings to further refine the proposal to make sure that it's acceptable and it brings together the views from all the different contracting parties. And within that process, I think it got delayed somewhat because the Mediterranean 2023 QSR process took priority, I think, during that time. So it's been delayed a little bit until 2025 now. And that whole development of EO6 has been done very much in line with the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which the contracting parties who are EU member states are, of course, following for this EU directive. And so the proposal takes fully account of the Commission decision in 2017. And indeed, many of the ongoing developments that are happening within the technical group on seabed habitats, which started up shortly after that, 2018, I think, and continues to develop a lot of the technical requirements for implementation of this ecological objective. So the proposal includes the main framework for implementation of EO6. So this is a definition of good environmental status, the environmental targets and the common indicators, and I'll explain a bit what those are in the next slides. And in order to help develop that proposal, there was a review of the key activities, the pressures that are considered to affect the seabed, a very thorough look at the possible links with the other ecological objectives in view of the fact that the seabed is connected in so many ways to the rest of the ecosystem. It has defined the habitat types that are to be considered and it started to look at the availability of data that could help drive the indicators. And as I said, the Mediterranean QSR 2023 was developed within this time period, and this was a great opportunity to have a thorough review of the activities and pressures across the Mediterranean, and to test a little bit the assessment process for the Adriatic Sea as part of that, and that led to some key recommendations on both on EO6 and on EO1 on benthic habitats. So here is the overall definition for EO6 in relation to the GES description and the targets. This is set out with an operational objective, indicators, the GES description, and the targets. This is set out in the same way as the other ecological objectives are, and we have then two main operational objectives. One is
deux objectifs opérationnels. Le premier est de maintenir ou d'entretenir l'extension naturelle de l'habitat benthique et essayer de limiter toute perte causée par la pression anthropogénique. Et le deuxième point, c'est essayer aussi d'entretenir la structure naturelle et ainsi que les fonctions et la biodiversité. Donc, l'indicateur pour le premier est l'extension de la perte physique de l'habitat naturel. Et le deuxième indicateur, c'est aussi de prolonger les effets indésirables sur l'habitat benthique. Et le deuxième est assez complexe, je dirais. Ce deuxième indicateur est assez complexe et on s'attend d'avoir plusieurs sous-indicateurs pour être capable de bien évoluer la chose. La description BEE, c'est vraiment l'extension de la perte pour chaque type d'habitat et qui a résulté des pressions anthropogéniques, et qu'il faut s'assurer que cela ne va pas excéder les proportions spécifiées par extension par l'extension naturelle des types d'habitat dans la zone d'évaluation. La deuxième description BEE est basée sur la limite des effets indésirables ou défavorables sur les conditions de chaque habitat, de chaque type d'habitat. Et ensuite, cela est exprimé en termes de cibles. Le premier, c'est vraiment l'étendue de la perte physique par type d'habitat et il faut s'assurer que cela n'excède pas un certain pourcentage de chaque étendue naturelle d'habitat. Et le deuxième point, c'est l'étendue des effets défavorables en matière de pression anthropogénique par type d'habitat. Et il faut voir si l'habitat est en bon état écologique ou n'est pas en bon état écologique. Donc cela nécessite une bonne évaluation. Et ça aussi, c'est l'approche prise par le DCSMM, la directive cadre européenne. Donc, nous avons défini tout ceci lors du processus MSFD qui a été implémenté par les pays européens. Et la
within the Mediterranean process. And as mentioned earlier on about the links with the EO1 and with the MSFD process. So these two operational objectives are very clearly linked, both with the way in which the habitats under EO1 are to be assessed, and also with the MSFD. So this helps the contracting parties who are EU member states to not have to duplicate work within the UNEP-MAP process. So the benthic habitats to be considered under EO1 are these 22 broad habitat types. They cover the full range of seabed within the Mediterranean, from the coast right down to the abyssal zone, and the range of substrate types from rock and biogenic reef through to coarse and mixed and sand and muddy sediments. So again, these are aligned with the habitat types being used within the MSFD process, and are directly compatible with the level 2 classes in the Barcelona Convention classification system, which is linked to the European classification system. So wherever possible, everything has been aligned to avoid duplication of work. And just to give you an indication of the availability of seabed maps to cover this work, these are the broad habitat types which have been prepared by the EMODNet EU CMAP project. We have the latest version available here from 2023, and as you can see, most of the Mediterranean is very deep water. It's in the bathyal and the abyssal zone, and the coastal zone is rather narrow and has got the more complex part of the distribution of these broad habitat types. So here we have some more detail in the Strait of Sicily, between Tunisia and Sicily and Malta. So we have already the availability then of a pan-Mediterranean map of these broad habitat types. But of course, if you're very familiar with the data within EU CMAP, you will appreciate that a lot of the maps still need quite a lot of improvement in terms of their quality. Okay, so the EO6 proposal has also defined the assessment areas for the future assessments, and this really helps in terms of understanding the way in which EO6 would be applied. So you would expect to have an assessment of the broad habitat types in each of these different assessment areas to assess which habitats are in good status and which habitats are not in good status and therefore might need management action. The basis for defining these assessment areas is various. It's both driven by the ecological characteristics that change from the east to the west of the Mediterranean. It has some input about the national waters and the management boundaries, and some of the GFCM boundaries have been used. As I said earlier, the ecological objectives, EO6 is linked in many ways to the other ecological objectives, because the seafloor has got so many links with many other aspects of the Mediterranean ecosystem. But the particularly relevant ones are EO1, which is dealing with specific habitats of the seabed, and with EO7 on hydrography, and EO8 on coastal ecosystems. And these will be discussed a bit later in this particular workshop. Several of the other ecological objectives are also potentially relevant, and that really depends on, at the moment, whether the indicators are directed towards assessing the state of the seabed. So for example, the non-indigenous species indicator isn't particularly well directed towards assessing the state of the seabed in relation to impacts from non-indigenous species, and the eutrophication objective certainly can have an effect on the seabed, but the indicators are more orientated towards the state of the water column. So we look specifically at the relationship between EO1 and EO6. So EO1 is really about some very specific benthic habitats that are considered to be under significant threat. So some of the recent focus has been on Posidonia seagrass meadows, on the coralligenous habitat, and on marl beds, and there's another series of particular habitats that are being considered under the EO1 banner. So in contrast, the EO6 has got a very much broader focus in terms of the full range of seabed habitats. Both are ultimately subject to the same range of pressures, and in that sense can benefit from the same range of management actions. Although the EO1 is probably going to benefit more from very targeted measures such as the designation of marine protected areas and the setup of particular action plans, whilst the EO6 can benefit from much broader measures that tackle the widespread pressures. The common indicators for EO1 are habitat distribution and habitat condition, and in fact we have exactly the same proposed for EO6, and we also have established the same set of assessment areas for the two. So this provides a good synergy between the implementation of the two EOs, and the data required for EO1 are more specific. They require particular monitoring methods at a different range of sites, and they're focused on the biological state of the seabed, whereas the focus for data collection on EO6 is more towards the activities and the pressures that are spread across the Mediterranean, and also to try to get as much reuse of assessments from the other ecological objectives. So we come now to the monitoring and assessment processes that are envisaged, and I think the key thing to focus on for EO6 is to reflect that the state of the Mediterranean seabed and its habitats is a consequence of the pressures from the human activities, and where these activities occur, their intensity and their duration. So it's rather than trying to consider monitoring the biodiversity of all of the seabed habitats right across the Mediterranean, the emphasis is on those activities that are most affecting the seabed, and to try to have a focus on that, so that you understand where the activities are having most of a problem, where there needs to be particular management action. And in doing that, particularly for many of the countries who've got many other policies in order to be implemented in relation to protecting the Mediterranean. There are for the EU countries, there are also a set of directives, the MSFD that we've mentioned, the new restoration law, the Habitats Directive, the Water Framework Directive, many policy obligations that require implementation, and it can become quite an overwhelming requirement to do the monitoring and assessment for all of these different things. So it's worth thinking about what is the underlying problems that we're trying to get a handle on. What are the key pressures? Where are they? And what actions can be taken that will have an effect on improving the status of the Mediterranean seabed and help to implement all of these policies. So this table gives you a very high-level summary, really, of the range of different pressures across the top: the biological, physical, pollution and climate change pressures, and the main activities that are leading to these sorts of pressures. So I think for the rest of the talk, I will particularly focus on the physical pressures, which can, as you can see, come from many different activities. So as part of the work for the Mediterranean QSR 2023, we did a review of the main pressures, and were able to look at the data that are held by the European Environment Agency's European Topic Center, and they collate data at a 10-kilometer square level for the whole of Europe. So it provides a very good basis to understand the distribution of the different pressures that are relevant for the seabed, and to start to get a handle on how EO6 could be assessed with the focus on the main pressures. So here we have the pressure from the bottom trawling, and as you can see with this thin blue line, which represents the 1,000-meter isobath, because there's a ban by GFCM on the bottom trawling below 1,000 meters, you can see that most of the data are lying above the 1,000-meter mark, but where you have this shallower part of the seabed, there's very significant activity from the bottom trawling. And you may look at that, and you may consider whether for the southern Mediterranean, there looks as though there could be a lack of data for that part of the Mediterranean. So, and just to show you some of the further work that's been done in relation to this seabed trawling. This is part of a study under the RAC and PAP project that Samar mentioned earlier, and here they've looked at the fishing intensity on the seabed, which is this left image, and you can see that the dark areas, the purple areas, are where there's very intense fishing, and the yellow areas are where there's much less fishing. And then there's the gaps around the coastal zone where there's no bottom trawling, and the very deep area towards the mouth of the Adriatic. And they've also then within this study looked at the economic benefit of the fishing over these different grounds. And so you can see on the right that the red areas are what are termed core fishing grounds, and these red areas bring 90% of the value of the bottom trawling from the entire area. So the red areas give you a very significant part of the total total economic value, whilst the blue areas are being trawled but give very little, 10% or less of the total value. So this shows the distribution of the activity, but also the possible ways in which you could consider reducing the areas in which the trawling occurs without significantly affecting the economic value of the fishery. And this sort of pattern has been shown to occur in most areas. Okay, so the second key pressure is the non-indigenous species, and here the data from the European Topic Centre show, as you would expect, that the intensity of the non-indigenous species is greatest in the Eastern Mediterranean, and perhaps less so in the Western Mediterranean. A very useful data set. In terms of physical loss, and we come on to this a little bit later with EO7 and EO8, the majority of the physical loss is in the coastal zone, where there's the most development of coastal constructions and some offshore oil and gas rigs and ports and that sort of thing. And the physical loss tends to have a very small footprint in terms of its damage to the seabed. Go back to the physical disturbance. The majority of the data on physical disturbance are relating to the earlier slide, which is about the extent of bottom trawling. But this data set then includes a whole range of other activities that are leading to physical disturbance. So again, you can see that this is mostly confined to the upper 1,000 meters. And then the last pressure to show you is the hydrographical change, and we'll come on to that with the later presentation on EO7. Here the data set is somewhat limited because it only comes from the Water Framework Directive for these 5 EU countries. I suspect there must be a newer data set now available from the later reporting for the Water Framework Directive, and hopefully we'll hear more about the work on EO7 under the IMAP process. Okay, so the EO6 proposal has set out an assessment process, and that involves having data on the seabed maps and on the distribution and intensity of the pressures, and making a relationship between those two, and coming to an assessment of the effects of impacts. So this general process was trialed during the preparation of the Mediterranean QSR. So you could see that on the right for the Adriatic Sea, and the top image is about the distribution of the 20 habitat types, which has been simplified down into these 6 biological zones. And then the bottom image shows the distribution of all the pressures on the Mediterranean, And certainly at this resolution, this 10-kilometer square resolution, it looks like the entire Adriatic is under some sort of pressure from the different human activities. But this exercise was extremely useful because some of the key lessons learned was that the data from the European Topic Center at 10 kilometers squared was too coarse for assessing the seabed, because particularly the narrow coastal shelf around the Mediterranean, within 10 kilometers squares, you can go from very shallow water to extremely deep water, and so you need a higher resolution for relating the data to the different habitat types. As I said earlier, there's a need to ensure we have good data coverage, particularly for the southern and eastern countries. And then this assessment was using pressure as a proxy for impact. So we need then to relate that to some of the impact indicators. So come now to the last few slides, and it's really giving some indication of the way forward. And I think the first is to develop the guidance fact sheets for EO6 based on these two new common indicators that will be adopted: the extent of physical loss and the extent of adverse effects. And something that's partly the point of this particular workshop is to consider the possibility to reuse some of the common indicators from the other ecological objectives, so that you maximize the synergy between the data that are being collected throughout the IMAP process. So these are the ones that are particularly relevant: the pressure and impact indicators from the non-indigenous species, from the commercial fishing, and from the hydrographical changes, the state indicators for EO1 and for EO8 on coastal development. And it's fair to say that some of these indicators would need some sort of adaptation for application under EO6. So, particular relevance to this workshop, the ecological objectives 7 on hydrographical changes is particularly relevant for the seabed habitats, both EO6 and EO1. And in order to be used for EO6, it would need to be presented as the extent of adverse effect per habitat type. And the assessment of EO7, I'm sure we'll hear more about this a bit later, can be done through through modeling and through the estimating the footprint of effect from different infrastructures. And then ecological objective 8 and common indicator 16 is about the assessment of the length of coastline, which is artificially modified by infrastructures and other coastal developments. And for use under EO6, it could be taken as a proxy for the extent of loss of the littoral zone, that's the rock and sediment habitats combined. But to do that, you would need to express it as in kilometer squared and percentage of habitat, rather than its current form, which is the total loss of length per country. And then a lot of the work that's gone into EO8 in terms of the general approach could be extended down into the subtidal zone to develop help develop the physical loss indicator. And then lastly, the IBM MED project has developed suitable guidance to help with this. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the physical loss indicator. The physical disturbance is probably the most important aspect of anthropogenic pressures that are affecting the seabed right throughout the Mediterranean. So this really would be the priority for further development. There are some areas of eutrophication in some parts of the Mediterranean that would benefit from a seabed indicator. Litter is always an important topic to consider, and then the IMAP process is starting to consider the effect of climate change. So really, I think probably the most important aspect to start taking forward is the physical disturbance indicator, and to get a handle on the extent of physical disturbance from the different activities. The most important, the most widespread one, of course, being the bottom trawling. And here there has been huge progress over the past years in developing indicators for the extent and distribution and intensity of bottom trawling through this SAR indicator, the swept area ratio. So there's very considerable work done through the auspices of ICES, the IBM MED project, and other projects. So this really, there's various advanced methodology for doing it, but it's a question of looking at that in the context of the Mediterranean to make sure it's most appropriate. And I think one of the key issues for implementation is to try to develop a higher resolution data set than is currently typically used by ICES for the data that they have for the Atlantic and the Baltic. And then to relate the fishing intensity to the assessment of impacts for the different habitat types. And this is currently is a huge work with TGC-BED by ICES to help do this relationship between the pressure and the impact. So I think the IMAP process can benefit enormously from the work that's going on there. And then the last slide really is to look at the some general developments that can start to be done to help implement EO6. So I think the first would be to concentrate on improving the data on the human activities and the pressures, and probably that is something that could really benefit from the southern countries and the eastern countries to help improve the data sets that's already available that I showed earlier. So there's a need to discuss the particular data format and resolution for that data, and probably to build that into the info-RAC system, and to link in with the existing processes within the EA and EMODNet, so that these data can contribute also to the rest of the European processes, and then to start collecting that data at the national level. And this provides then this would provide a very good starting point then for the next steps in the EO6 implementation. And that would center around relating the data on the activities and the pressures to the habitat maps and the assessment areas and to the existing benthic monitoring programs to assess how well the availability of the monitoring data can relate to what the data on the pressures is telling us. Okay, so that's really a very high-level overview of the what I would consider would be good next steps in the process. Thank you for your attention, and I hope we have some good discussion on this.
Thank you, David, and very, let's say, very interesting presentation with many related topics from fisheries to hydrography, and so now, before the question, I will give the floor to Samar in order to make this workshop more interactive. She will ask you some question, and participants, we would like to hear from you in the chat. Samar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Yassine. First, I'd like to thank David for this presentation. It really sums up the work of years and years on the EU6. We are happy to see that it's finally an official ecological objective with official common indicators that the countries could start to implement and to collect data on. This ecological objective showcases that the power of integration between the different ecological objectives, and it couldn't be done without this integration, without working together between SPARAC, POPRAC, and the different areas of expertise. So thank you for that. So together with my colleague Khulud, I don't know if you know her, she's Khulud Athiman. She recently joined our team here in CU, and she's supporting both projects EcAp MED Plus and Marine MED Litter. We prepared like a Mentimeter. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. So go ahead, take your phones and scan this QR code. You will have access to this series of questions that we can go through together. If you don't prefer to use your phone, Khulud already copy pasted the email, the address towards the link. You can click it and address it in your laptops, but phone is more practical for these questions. I see also that the number of participation to the meeting is increasing. So hi and welcome to everyone who's just joined us. And please go ahead and try this quick quiz with us. It's based on the presentation of David and on what we will also tackle with the presentation of POPREG. So you need to answer very quickly or try to the extent of possible. So which activity has the strongest impact on the seafloor? Bottom trawling, eating ice cream on the beach, fireworks, or swimming? Eating ice cream on the beach is the right answer, obviously. Thank you. Bottom trawling, as explained, is one of the most strongest impact on and pressure on the seafloor integrity. Moving on to another question with less ice cream. to achieve the overall goal of seafloor integrity on EU6, where should we prioritize our most limited management resources for the next 5 years, for example? Is it mostly on pressure control, data, or to work on data first? Zero loss on preventing new physical loss in healthy habitats, restoration in means of actively restoring most degraded habitats. We've allocated more time for this because you need to read it, and it's more on reflection side. Yeah, most of you answered on the pressure control and regulating root sources of damaging pressures, which should be the first priority, but also to work on other aspects. We can move to another question, Khalid, maybe. Which pressure is the single biggest, most irreversible threat to our coastal ecosystem, long-term ability to survive and adapt? Do you think it's on local construction, permanent habitat destruction, upstream control related to poor river flow management, or cumulative stress, local damage, plus climate change impact? Global climate change related to shifts in pH and temperature, among other. Few more seconds to hear your answers, to see where this is going. So, bravo, most of you answered on cumulative stress, which is actually the most irreversible pressure and threat to the coastal ecosystem. So with this question, we end our little quiz, and back to you, Yassine.
Thank you, Samar. Thank you, colleagues. If you have a question to David for the presentation for the EU6 in general aspect, it's time to ask. I don't see hands. Everything was very clear from David.
I think David's presentations are always very neat, and they go directly to the point. So thank you, David, again for that. But we welcome any discussion.
In any case, David will stay with us, and we will have time for a question after the presentation of colleagues from PAPRAC. If you want, Samar, we can, and colleagues from Marco and Ivan are ready. You can take the floor and start to, Mark, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Yassine. And good morning to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you today and share our experience, and especially where we come with links to ecological objective 6 from the other two ecological objectives. And this is what we intend to present this morning. At the end, we have to look at the ecosystems and also pressures, and through our indicators, in an integrated way, to look for the cumulative impacts, and then, put measures that will, tackle in cross-cutting way different activities that are important, or that create adverse effects to marine environment. I will share the presentation, but just a quick introduction before. PAPRAC is one of the components, for those that are for the first time with us, components of EcAp MED as a sister center to SPARAC and other colleagues from Plan Bleu, MEDPOL, and so on. Our major objective is to support Mediterranean countries to implement the protocol on integrated coastal zone management. So we are dealing with the terrestrial and marine part of the coastal zone according to the definition, and a number of pressures and activities that we have to somehow take into account, not only on land part, when it comes to planning and management activities on terrestrial part of coastal zone, but also territorial waters are under the scope of the protocol. So when it comes to IMAP and implementation of the ecosystem approach, we coordinate and assist the countries to implement two ecological objectives: ecological objective 8 on coastal ecosystems and landscapes, and ecological objective 7 on hydrographic alterations. So I will now open the presentation so you can follow some slides. I'm not sure whether you can see it. Not yet?
Not yet.
Yeah, now.
Try again.
Yeah, it's coming. You can see it now.
Yes, please put it in full mode
Like
screen.
this. Like this.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, myself, I will present the links to the ecological objective 7 on hydrographic alterations, and Ivan, my colleague, will present the links to ecological objective 8 on coastal ecosystems and landscapes. So the ecological objective 7, the title is a bit longer. Of course, we speak about the alteration of hydrographic conditions that does not adversely affect coastal and marine ecosystems. This is the ecological objective of this objective 7, as I said, and we have only one indicator under this ecological objective. This is common indicator 15, which is the location and extent of the habitats potentially impacted by hydrographic alterations. So maybe difficult to grasp what we are actually doing with this indicator, but we are considering the marine habitats which actually may be lost or affected by changes in due to hydrographic conditions. And these hydrographic conditions can be changed due to human interventions, due to construction in affected marine environment. So alterations, can be, we change currents, waves, and sediments, transport and sediments in general, due to new large-scale developments in marine environment that have the potential to alter hydrographic conditions. So we are speaking of developments which will cause alterations of these parameters, hydrographic parameters. And when it comes to structures, we have which are permanent, actually, structures that we are looking at. These are, for example, harbors, ports, marinas, wind farms, coastal defense structures, and so on. So we speak about the structures that are going to be built or are built in marine environment. And due to these structures, the hydrographic parameters are changed. So we have either stronger and different currents, the waves may increase, they have different directions, the sediments have different ways of transport, and so on. So we are changing hydrographic conditions, and these conditions then have influence on habitats, marine habitats. So first of all, due to physical loss. On one side, we have physical loss because when we construct or we extend, for example, a port, I will show you a case at the end of the presentation, we actually lose forever a certain habitat. And around the area, we may lose or change change the habitats due to the hydrographic conditions, due to different currents, waves, and sediments, and so on, that may have adverse effects on these habitats. And that's where we say potentially impacted, because it's very difficult to say in advance what will be the effects of such changes in a certain area, and I will come to this later. So the guess for this indicator, this ecological objective, is actually saying that negative impacts due to the construction of these new structures are minimal, with no influence on the larger scale coastal and marine systems. So we try to minimize these negative impacts due to construction of new structures, actually. And how we can achieve this? Mainly through planning of these new structures. When we are looking for sites, locations of these new structures, we should take into account vulnerability of the habitats, so that if we have to construct something, that we really choose the habitats that are maybe, how to say, that are less vulnerable, or that are maybe not too rare in a certain area, or that in the surrounding area, that they can have potential for restoration, for example. So we have to take different criteria into account, so that our negative impacts are minimum, not including the footprint. So we need to have alternatives, different options for siting of different structures in marine environment, so that we choose the habitats that will have least negative impacts. And of course, mitigation measures are also important to take into account, to minimize the impacts of these structures that may create alterations of hydrographic conditions that can potentially affect marine habitats. It's a chain to get to marine, actually, to the habitats due to this. So you see, we are actually looking at a small part that has a link to ecological objective 6 on seafloor integrity. We are looking at structures that will cause physical loss due to construction, and the surrounding area that may be affected. The target defined in this common indicator 15, saying that the planning of these new structures should take into account all possible mitigation measures, so to minimize the impact on the coastal and marine ecosystems and its services integrity and cultural and historic assets, and where possible, to promote ecosystem health. So the target is also a bit broad. So there are direct links to ecological objective 1, where we have habitat types, the habitat map with the broad and detailed habitats, and to seafloor integrity, as I already said. Okay, a bit of the history, so that you will understand where we are at the moment. This indicator, an ecological objective, has been adopted and put on the list of IMAP indicators in 2016, so almost 10 years. And to be frank, and to say that all throughout these years, we were trying to implement the indicator, and at first it was very, I would say, ambitious. So the assessment of the impacts has been put, let's say, on the shoulders of the agencies, of the institutions that have to report on the indicators, and not on the planning or those institutions in the countries that have to issue planning on building permit, because at the end we are looking on those structures that actually would need the planning and the building permit. So constructing a wind farm or extending or building a new port marina would require in every country a planning permit. And in order to come to a planning and a building permit, a series of analyses would have to be done, including environmental impact assessment, strategic assessment, and maybe even something through marine spatial planning, where, for example, we are looking for areas which would be less vulnerable to least vulnerable to impacts from construction. So originally, the indicator was asking for modeling of all these impacts, hydrographic changes, due to a specific structure that would be built. So in order to do so, all these models would be based on a series of historic data that we all know that are not available. So it was very, very frustrating, I would say, for the countries to report, on this, very demanding from all kind of resources, human resources that were not able actually to perform such analysis, but also the availability of data was the major burden to do such modelings. And at the end, through the discussions in Commons, we have found that there are a lot of scientific uncertainties, uncertainties related to analysis of these changes. Who would say that a certain the level of change of currents, for example, have a negative or a detrimental impact to a certain habitat that would never recover, that would never restore. So, for example, this was just an example, but there were many other uncertainties related to assessment of such changes due to hydrographic changes. So, for the quality status report in 2017 and the very last one, 2023, none of the countries actually reported on this indicator because it was definitely impossible to report because the task was too demanding, and countries were constantly asking to simplify the guidance fact sheet, the methodology on how to assess these changes. So the last two Commons have discussed, in this biennium, discussed the simplification of this guidance fact sheet, and at the end, it has been approved by the ecosystem coordination group meeting, including the MAP focal point that followed this meeting, and most probably the COP in Cairo will adopt this improved or simplified guidance fact sheet. So what we are requesting now for the countries to report on. The first one, the loss of the seafloor due to the construction, due to the structure itself, the footprint of the structure. So it's actually, we're speaking of the physical loss, and you have seen earlier, David has mentioned the physical loss, the footprint of the structure that will, be developed through these indicators 37 mentioned, and has to be still developed, and we have to take, this into account because the indicator 37 on the extent of physical loss, will include many other human activities, not only structures that are covered by this indicator. So there is a direct contribution and connection between the two. But then the second part the countries have to report is the surrounding area of potentially affected habitats. And this is actually the major, the most difficult part how to define, and we have left this to the actually planning authorities that are issuing planning or building permits. So the reporting institute or agency will actually find the information of the footprint and the surrounding area from environmental impact assessment. So as we said, for each structure that has, to be permitted by the planning permit, will need to have environmental impact assessment. And in this assessment, the expert judgment, or I don't know how they are going to develop for each of the project that is being planned, actually, what is the surrounding area that potentially could be affected due to this structure. So at the end, we are doing the mapping of the area where the construction will take place, the footprint of the structure, the mapping. We need to have another layer, the mapping of the surrounding area with the potential changes of habitat, estimated based from the data information extracted from EIA, SCA, MSP, even expert judgments and so on, because as I said, there are lots of uncertainties. And then we need to intersect these two layers with the map of habitats, with the habitat map. And this is the very clear and straight link to ecological objective 1. So the result is actually would provide information of the footprint and the surrounding area, saying or explaining which habitats have been lost on one side because of the footprint of the structure, and the surrounding area where habitats can potentially be changed or impacted. And actually, which are those habitats? Yeah, and as I said, these are the very clear and direct links to ecological objective 1 and 6. Now, I have a very simple example, existing harbor that would be extended in the future. So this is the current situation. Okay, this is the way how they plan to extend it, for example, and this would be the footprint and the footprint of the structure. But in addition to that, we need to have the map of habitats, around that area. So we have different types and so on. We have seen from the previous presentation the broad types, and we have the surrounding area here. There were through the planning, through the environmental impact assessment, there were three areas actually detected where, but then the orange one was selected as the one to report where the habitats would potentially be affected mostly. So the reports would come in kilometers square on the habitats which are either lost completely or potentially affected. And we have decided for this indicator that countries would report every 6 years. So they would report on all the structures built from year 1 to year 6, in a certain country. So yeah, I think this was what I wanted to share with you today. And my colleague Ivan will explain the link related to ecological objective 8 on coastal landscapes and ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. We can move directly to Ivan, and if we have any question, we can open the floor to the question after the presentation of Ivan. Ivan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Yasin. Just 1 second, please. Let me share my presentation. I hope you see it.
Yes, just put it in the full.
Yes, just 1 second.
Okay.
Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Just a sec, please. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm Ivan Sekovsky, Program Officer at PAP-RAC, and today I will speak briefly about impacts of coastal artificialization on seafloor integrity, basically on the link between two ecological objectives of IMAP, Ecological Objective 8 and Ecological Objective 6. So just to start, the peculiarity, so to say, of Ecological Objective 8 is that unlike other ecological objectives, it focuses on the land part, on the terrestrial part of a coastal zone, and it doesn't have its counterpart in the marine strategy framework directive. So why is that? We also wanted to include the provisions of the ICZM protocol, which was mentioned by Marco, and also to acknowledge that coastal zones are one of the most dynamic system, and they have significant impacts on the surrounding sea from land-based sources, of course. And any artificialization of coastline leads to some kind of physical alteration. It changes the coastal dynamics, and subsequently it influences the sea floor and the benthic habitats. So in brief, what I wanted to focus in this presentation is how coastal artificialization can affect physical processes, seafloor integrity, and benthic habitats. Before that, just a brief introduction of what two indicators of ecological objective 8 represent. There are two common indicators. First one is indicator 16. Full name is length of coastline subjected to physical disturbance due to the influence of human-made structures. But essentially, it is a share of artificial coastline in the total coastline of Mediterranean countries. And the second one is indicator 25. It has been for some time in the status of a candidate indicator, but this year the EcAP coordination group in September, it was proclaimed as a common indicator for the Mediterranean countries, and it will be included in the new revised version of IMAP. This graph on the right, I just wanted to include to demonstrate somehow the trend, the pace of coastal artificialization. This is the share of built-up environment in 150 meters belt from the coastline for all the Mediterranean countries, and the blue line here represents the state in 1975, and the yellow one in 2015. So when we make some kind of an average, we can see that say that in 75 in the 150 meter belt, the share of this coastal strip that was occupied by built-up area was around 4%, and now it's around 13%. So we can see the dynamics of not only population growth in coast, but also the infrastructure, the secondary housing, the tourism facilities, and everything that is being constructed on the coast. So when we go indicator by indicator, from the indicator 16, we can see that these are the most common structures to be in the very intersection between the land and the coast. So it's usually some kind of protection structures such as breakwaters, sea walls, groins, and so on, but also ports and marinas, which have, we will see later, a significant share in this part of making a natural coast artificial. And on the right, there is an image how basically this assessment looks like. It's taking the national coastline, identifying all the artificial elements, human-made elements, the one in red and the one in green in natural, and to see in each country the share of this kind of coastline in the total coastline of the country. So unfortunately, there are no trends because up until now, only the baseline study was made for the quality status report in 2023. Not all countries submitted their assessments. So based on this 57% of the total Mediterranean coastline that was assessed, 85% was proclaimed natural and around 15 was artificial. So it will be very interesting to see in the next cycle, in the next 6 years, with another assessment, whether this number is relatively steady or is increasing at certain pace. About the second indicator, as I said, it was for quite some time in the status of the candidate. Now it's a common indicator. It's a land cover change observed in different classes. Classes meaning coastal strips in 300 meters from the coastline, 1 kilometer and 10 kilometers, to see in different different distances from the coastline what is the pace of different land cover change. And it is observed for 5 major classes. One is the built-up area. Second one is agricultural, forest and semi-natural land, wetlands, and water bodies. And 2 additional layers are also observed. This was asked by the countries. One is the layer of protected areas and one of low elevation coastal zone for different purposes. Of course, protected areas to see whether there are some land use change in the area of that is proclaimed as protected, and low elevation coastal zone to acknowledge the risk, especially from climate change, especially from flooding in this low elevation coastal zone, which are specifically endangered. And arbitrarily, it was chosen to be less than 5-meter elevation. So I would say, to say very banally, that the most problematic change is the increase in built-up area, because this kind of change is almost irreversible, and it can have serious impact, such as impact of ecosystem integrity. It increases the fragmentation of ecosystem, loss of habitats. It makes barrier effect. To sort of block of communication between ecosystems, etc. And here on the right, as I said, it was a candidate indicator, so there was no Mediterranean level assessment, but there were some pilots. One of such pilots was in the Adriatic, and here we can say these red dots are basically land take, meaning the increase of the built-up area. It doesn't seem a lot, but we need to realize that this is only for the 6-year period between 2012 and 2018, and by this we can detect it areas where most of the urbanization, coastal urbanization, took place. So this was just a short introduction of 2 indicators, but now maybe to focus more on the relation with ecological objective 6, meaning the impacts on sea floor and benthic habitats. There are several major impacts. I will go briefly through each one. One is the alteration of a cross-shore sediment transport. The coastal zone and especially the sandy areas are being fed by sediment from different sources, from the river discharge, tidal flux, erosion from dunes, cliffs, and so on. So basically, any artificialization in this area basically blocks this it alters this kind of sediment transport, which then has, of course, consequences to nearby seafloor and to marine habitats. So this was kind of a, let's say, vertical transport of sediment, but there is also important longshore transport, to say horizontal, where with this kind of structures that are protecting certain parts of the beach from erosion, it maintains more or less the stability. However, it always appears that in one side of this kind of groins, there is a sediment accumulation, which can result in the erosion on the other side. Basically, it's a sort of disruption of longshore sediment transport. Then something, what that was mentioned by David, there is, of course, the direct physical loss sea floor when some certain constructions are being put on the very coastline. But there are also indirect ones. For example, as we can see on the image on the right, any construction in the coastal zone leads to impacts on turbidity. This means that some processes underwater processes such as photosynthesis can be temporarily disrupted because it reduces the sunlight to reach these photosynthetic organisms. But even on a broader scale, this material gets usually carried by waves and currents and eventually settles down. And it can settle down on some important habitats such as seagrass, coralline, algae, sponges, and it can disrupt the natural processes of ecosystems. And finally, cumulative impacts. This is more maybe related to the fact of land cover change in the narrow coastal strip, because with this kind of change, usually there are some undesired elements connected. For example, pollution of the nearby sea, especially with the untreated sewage water and with emerging contaminants, but also it can be related to eutrophication, marine litter, and some pollution that is usually, I would say, not in the forefront, in the highlight, such as noise pollution, light pollution, etc. So when we consider all these effects, they have broader ecologic and socioeconomic impacts. One of these is impact on carbon sequestration. This is especially in terms, for example, on the impact of a nearby seagrass habitats, which then impacts also their oxygen production, nutrient recycling, etc. But also, it's important to note that when we lose these habitats, we also lose these nursery grounds which are especially important for fisheries, for example, because there are nursery and breeding areas for fisheries. It can disrupt the entire food webs and have significant impact on fisheries industries. And then, by losing coastal habitats, there is also decrease in biodiversity, ecological connectivity, but also resilience, because we also lose the natural coastal protection. For example, when we mentioned now the seagrass habitats in the areas which are covered by such habitats, the wave height that reaches the shoreline can be reduced 10, 15, even 20%. So we lose the natural coastal protection, and also we lose the ability to sort of rebuild the natural coastal ecosystems after some kind of a disturbance event, such as some heavy storm and so on. And of course, there are, as mentioned earlier, there are cumulative impacts. For example, with some kind of disruption in the nearby waters, and with eutrophication and the warming from climate change, this can lead in the future to more hypoxia events and lower water quality, which has significant impacts on the marine ecosystem, but finally, of course, on humans and on the public health. And finally, certain mitigation measures that can be recommended. Well, the most obvious one would be to avoid any construction in the very vicinity of sea, if possible, of course. And this is one of the core of the main pillars of the ICZM protocol. In its Article 8, it calls for at least 100 meters of setback for any kind of coastal constructions. Of course, there are always exemptions, but this is some kind of ecosystem approach to it. And of course, this only relates to the natural coastlines that are already, in the natural state. The second one will be to employ nature-based solutions whenever possible. Important coastal ecosystems such as dunes, wetlands, coastal forests, which will maintain the natural dynamics and the balance of the coastline, but also can be very important in enhancing biodiversity, in carbon sequestration, but also, for example, in preventing erosion in coastlines. And third, also important one, which is more recently being employed, there are not so many examples, is the eco-engineering. For example, even if one is one chooses to employ some kind of hard structures, today there are more examples where it can be employed in terms of encourage habitats. For example, this is one picture I found from Ireland where they're building a sea walls with some kind of elements that can attract marine organisms, even sponges, algae, and so on. There are also examples of breakwaters which have sort of hollow spaces so they can attract some marine organisms such as small crabs and so on. So there are some interesting recent eco-engineering approaches. The third one would be to minimize the impacts of construction and dredging processes if they are already decided to take place. Of course, some precautionary measures need to be taken into account. For example, to avoid areas which have valuable benthic habitats such as seagrass beds or salt marshes, to avoid breeding seasons of some organisms,
et pour utiliser des matériaux utiles. Également pour des zones où on a eu des pertes d'habitat.
There is very important to find the places which are suitable for habitat restoration, which then opens the door for some also community involvement in some, I don't know, seagrass transplantation or some coastal afforestation, which then has much broader effects to involve the community and stakeholders to acknowledge the importance of natural ecosystems. But all these points which I mentioned are only possible through smart and proactive integrated planning, through integrated coastal zone management planning and marine spatial planning, because these issues are very complex. And that's why the second point, what we also need is standard and synchronized integrated monitoring, because as it was mentioned by Yassine, but also by David, there are many interconnections between different ecological objectives, not only EO6 and EO7 and EO8, but also EO1 on biodiversity, EO5 on eutrophication. And only by integrated monitoring, we can observe the changes on a broader scale. And this, in my opinion, is one of the values of IMAP, this letter I on the beginning of the acronym, which is the Integrated Monitoring and Assessment Program. So this was relatively brief from my side. If you have any questions for me and Marco, we are here, or if you want to later contact me, here is my email. And I want to thank you for your attention. And thanks to Yassine and the organizers for inviting us to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you, colleagues of PAPRAC, for a very clear presentation. I really appreciate. This is very important to have this integration. Like you said, there is many interconnection between several integrator and ecological objectives. So now, colleagues, it's time for a question. So if you have any question to David, to Mark, to Marco, to Ivan, we are ready to answer to your question. Please, if you have any question, raise your hands. If not, so Anis? Any question? Because we are ready to ask any question, Anis?
We can't hear you, Anis.
We can't hear you, Anis.
Hi, by the way.
Non, malheureusement non, Anis. Sharif, please go ahead.
Hello, good morning.
Allez-y, bonjour. J'aimerais tout d'abord vous remercier tous pour ces présentations. En fait, je n'ai pas de questions, en fait. Tout a été si clair et je suis satisfait de prendre la parole juste pour vous remercier tous.
Ok, merci beaucoup, Sharif.
Thank you, Sharif.
Anis, if your mic, it's okay. If not, I can ask a question to David.
Je pourrais moi-même poser une question adressée à David.
C'est une question assez générale. C'est, vous m'entendez, Samad?
Yes, I wanted to say to Anis, maybe you can type it in the chat.
Ok.
Peut-être adresser votre parole dans le chat.
David, ma question sera en français pour encourager les collègues de profiter aussi de la traduction simultanée. Pour l'indicateur, le deuxième indicateur de l'objectif écologique 6, qui est en relation avec les effets secondaires. C'est pas la disparition des habitats, mais les effets secondaires qu'on peut détecter sur les habitats, soit perte de taux de séquestration de carbone, soit le changement de composition des espèces dans l'habitat. Votre recommandation, est-ce que on doit cibler des espèces particulières ou il faut avoir une idée claire sur la majorité des habitats et des espèces pour définir les bonnes espèces et les bons effets secondaires? Ça, c'est ma première question. La deuxième question, c'est en relation avec l'objectif écologique 1 et les habitats prioritaires qu'on est en train de suivre dans l'objectif écologique 1, surtout l'indicateur commun 1 et 2. On est focalisé actuellement sur l'herbier de Posidonie, les habitats, les assemblages coralligènes et les merles. Et on a toujours cette recommandation des pays de la côte est et ouest de la Méditerranée que la Posidonie, par exemple, n'existe pas. Est-ce que c'est quoi les habitats prioritaires qu'on peut utiliser pour l'objectif écologique 6? Comme ça, on peut avoir une idée sur la qualité et l'étendue et l'état des herbiers si ces habitats prioritaires pour l'objectif écologique 1 ne sont pas présents dans les pays. Je vois aussi la main de Marco. Marco, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Yassine. Again, I would go also with a question to David, because we all need to understand all these links, and I think it's good that we discuss and try to clarify, at least to see how best we can contribute one to each other. I understand that ecological objective 6 is now defined, but we will still need to develop two indicators related to this ecological objective. And okay, I understand that for the extent of physical loss, I think this would be rather, of course, difficult, but rather easy to define, especially when I look at the structures, for example, that will be built in a certain area. There you will definitely lose certain habitats. To me, the other one is much more difficult, and there are lots of uncertainties related to that. And I don't know whether you have already reflected some ideas on how to define the extent of adverse effects, because, this was one of the most difficult part in our indicator 15, how to define the surrounding area, where the habitats would be, affected, because there is also a lot of uncertainties to that, because some some habitats may come back, may be restored by themselves in a certain time once they adapt to different to the changes of hydrographic conditions. In our case, for example, some of them, will be changed. Some of them, some new will come instead of those that are currently there. How to assess, these changes, what is positive and what would be negative, and how to report on this. This is my, my very difficult question, I would say, because that's why we left the surrounding area. We defined it as potentially affected. We cannot say that they will be definitely lost or affected adversely, or they will never come back, or whatever. And we left this maybe even to expert judgment report on these effects, because by modeling, I think we do not have enough data to model such changes. When it comes to physical to construction, to put in some structures, at sea that will change hydrographic conditions. But the list of different human impacts in your case is much broader. So thank you for this.
So thank you. Enis, do you manage to open your mic? Or?
Let me see if you hear me now.
Now. Perfect.
Okay, thanks a lot, and hello everyone. It's really interesting to see where you stand and the progress made for the ecological objectives. So maybe a very first comment specifically on the EU6 and also for the presentation. Thank you, David. We saw in some of the maps data on bottom trawling, specifically on the Adriatic. But there is also, area where there is no fishing activities, and specifically in Pomopit. And in those maps, we saw it as indicated with, some bottom activity happening there. So I wonder if a part of that 1,000 meter FRA that was included in the map, the other ones were also included in the analysis. So this is one of the comments, but also a general comment, and this will show it probably once we will be having more progress on the EU6. So far, we know very well that because we have a lot of data on fisheries, we know, how to assess the impact, but probably for the other activity, we still need more information to be able to assess whether there are other activities altering the seafloor, and this is also something we will be looking for, and it will be quite helpful to assess. I will start with this question, and maybe later we come back to something else. Thank you.
Yes. Olfa, we can give the floor to David, and after to come back to you, Olfa, if you agree with that.
Okay, thank you, Yassine, and thanks very much to the colleagues for these questions. While I'm talking, I wonder.
Alors que je parle, Yassine, pourriez-vous me rappeler de votre question sur les effets secondaires? Je ne suis pas sûr que j'ai bien suivi votre question.
David,
pour mieux comprendre votre question,
the contracting party, they have to agree on the list of species of effect that they have to monitor. If, for example, the blue carbon,
for the monitorer et surveiller l'effet carbone.
Or a list of species that they have to monitor for this new common indicator. It's similar to Marco question. Is the second common indicator for the EU6 is for the moment is very important and for sure, but it's very difficult to implement. This is the idea.
Right. Okay. I think it relates also to your second question about the specific habitat types in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's really trying to define which species and which habitats are most appropriate for the overall assessment of EO6. And so in one of my slides, I said I would recommend that we start off with this a program for the data collection on the activities and the pressures, and the presentations on EO7 and EO8 very clearly show how much good progress has been made on collecting the data on the distribution of the activities relevant to those objectives. So that's really the sort of data on the activity that is really important to extend out into the area for the EO6. And then the second perspective I had was then to look at the existing monitoring stations, and there are monitoring stations for of the benthos from many different purposes in the different countries, and to see how well they can be used under an EO6 perspective, rather than to try to predefine anything at the moment. So there'll be lots of Posidonia monitoring in some countries, particularly the western part of the Mediterranean, and there is no Posidonia then in the east. So you're not using that, but there is other monitoring happening in the east that can be equally valid for
des questions qui pourraient être utiles pour le IO6, même dans la zone orientale. Donc, c'est une question de distribution des impacts physiques et des perturbations qui nous permet d'avoir une évaluation plus précise. Je pense que on aura à développer davantage l'IO6 pour avoir une idée plus claire des données et de la pression. Lorsque j'ai examiné les données pour ce qui est à travers le centre européen, j'ai réalisé effectivement il y a des zones en Méditerranée qui ne sont pas assez bien représentées. Donc on pourrait lancer ce processus de meilleure collection de données. Marco?
Very difficult question about assessing the condition of the habitats for the second indicator. I think it's common indicator 36, if I remember correctly. Yeah, there are. If you take, for example, the eutrophication assessment, there are very good indicators available under the Water Framework Directive for assessing the state of the benthos in relation to the increase in eutrophication, and I think and I mentioned also the assessment of the physical disturbance from bottom trawling and other physical activities. There's very good work underway within the other conventions, the OSPAR, the HELCOM, and within ICES, in order to be able to assess the change in status according to the different levels of physical disturbance. So I would recommend that we we look at those other developments in the other regions and try to assess which ones are most appropriate for that Mediterranean region. And I think, Anis, you were picking up on the data on the bottom trawling that was shown for the Adriatic. I think that data set was also a bit dated for now, and there's a much more regular collection of data on the distribution of the fishing activity, which I'm sure you're more than well aware. And when I looked at the particular map that I showed, that I took from the European Topic Center, I was a bit surprised about the number of possible fishing activities outside of the below the 1,000 meter mark, where there shouldn't be any bottom trawling, and possibly also in some of these fisheries restricted areas. So there's a bit of a question about looking at the data that are available and checking that it's all actually valid. There can be sometimes errors in the way that the swept area ratio data are assessed. I know that from some of the discussions on the Atlantic side. So yes, there needs to be some checking of that, and certainly there needs to be brought in the information on the other activities that are causing physical disturbance. That there were 6 or 7 different other activities that are listed in that slide that I showed, and so that really would come in as part of the data collection process. But I think I was struck by the presentations from Marco and Ivan about the good progress that's been made with EO7 and EO8 in terms of the practical development of those indicators, and I think we can learn a lot from their experience in order to define the data needs that would be suitable for the EO6 work in terms of the distribution of the activities and the pressures. And I think that to me would be an early recommendation for how to start in practice the implementation for EO6, because until you understand the distribution of the activities and the pressures, it's very difficult then to understand whether the biological monitoring that is currently in place is in the right place, and whether there's any sort of need to modify that aspect of it. So that's for a little bit later, I think, in the implementation process. And of course, in the meantime, there is huge work under the I6 and
sous le I6 et la convention et le processus nécessaire pour développer les indicateurs pour mieux évaluer les conditions nécessaires.
I remember when I first started work on the Marine Strategy Framework Directive back in 2008, I was I don't know, I was bewildered by the scale of what needed to be done to do the assessments of all of the biodiversity, the birds and the fish and the water column and the seabed, and it was very bewildering, and I had a sort of very clear perspective on how you might start to tackle that complexity by breaking it down into some more manageable tasks. But when you look now that we need 20 years further on in the development, and there has been absolutely enormous development within the EU processes and the regional sea conventions to make these assessments possible. And so the 2023 MED QSR has come on a huge way since the 2017 assessment, and the same for the other regional sea conventions. So we are slowly but surely able to make these Mediterranean-wide assessments in a good way that tell us about the state of the region, and then use that to help influence the management actions. So even if it feels a little bit daunting at the moment, all of these things are slowly but surely becoming possible.
Thank you, David. Olfa? Bonjour.
Bonjour Yassine.
Bonjour Olfa, comment vas-tu?
Ça va?
Alhamdulillah.
Donc, je dois remercier le SPARAC et le
Hello,
PAPRAC pour
Olfa. Hello, Yassine.
le workshop que je trouve très interactif et important pour nous, les chercheurs. Donc, je me présente, je suis Olfa Cheid, chercheur à l'Institut national des sciences et technologies de la mer à Tunisie, du laboratoire de biodiversité marine. Donc, je dois aussi remercier la coordination de l'IMAP, Samar et ses collègues. Voilà, donc vous avez dit que l'une des recommandations que vous allez discuter au cours des prochains COP, c'est la simplification des indicateurs communs pour les objectifs écologiques 6, 7 et 8. Et je vois qu'il manque beaucoup de données au niveau des pays du sud de la Méditerranée et un petit peu au niveau de l'est de la Méditerranée. Donc, je voudrais savoir en 2 ou 3 lignes ou activités de recherche que
Olfa,
vous... Oui,
bonjour, ça fait plaisir de te voir, mais malheureusement, on ne peut pas t'entendre bien. Je sais pas, ta voix est un peu, ça coupe. Si tu peux changer un peu le micro.
ok,
Et comme ça,
vous
oui,
m'entendez?
ça c'est mieux, beaucoup mieux.
D'accord,
Merci.
je suis désolée pour le son. Donc, je disais qu'au niveau de la rive sud méditerranéenne, il manque beaucoup de données et qu'on n'a pas une base de données. Donc, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez nous conseiller en tant que coordinateur et expert pour les chercheurs de notre zone, par quelle thématique simplifiée on peut commencer pour avoir des données et construire notre base de données, des études de terrain, bien sûr, parce que particulièrement, il existe des zones au niveau de notre zone, particulièrement je parle de la Tunisie, qui sont encore vierges, qui sont riches en biodiversité marine, qui peuvent constituer des hotspots au niveau de la Méditerranée et qu'il manque de données benthiques, hydrologiques et au niveau aussi du littoral, et que il y a des efforts nationaux pour par exemple, faire des constructions ou des exploitations touristiques et qu'il n'existe pas déjà les données de terrain écologiques qui peuvent dire non, il faut tenir compte de ces constitutions écosystémiques. Voilà, donc c'est ça ma question, parce que nous travaillons sur, vous savez, sur les tortues marines, les cétacés, et qu'il existe des zones vierges, assez vierges, qu'on peut les protéger, mais qu'on n'a pas les données suffisantes pour défendre ces zones-là au niveau des objectifs écologiques 6, 7 et 8. Donc j'aimerais bien savoir quelles thématiques, quelles activités de recherche simplifiées que nous, les chercheurs, on pourra entamer dans les années qui vont venir. Et merci beaucoup.
Merci Olfa pour cette question. Je vais donner une première réponse et laisser aussi l'occasion aux experts et au PAPRAC, peut-être ils ont donné des compléments d'information. Pour la Tunisie, c'est vrai que il n'y a pas de centralisation, disons, de données. Je sais que en termes d'études sur les habitats benthiques, que ce soit l'INSTM, que ce soit plusieurs chercheurs tunisiens, sont en train de faire un excellent travail. Mais ce qui pourrait améliorer la situation, c'est de centraliser, de capitaliser sur ces données. Et je pense que pour la Tunisie, il y a toujours cette opportunité qu'à travers les projets qui sont financés par la Commission européenne, qui sont gérés par le SPARAC, par le PAPRAC et par les différents centres, aussi d'améliorer la situation en termes de suivi, je veux dire de suivi continu sur les habitats benthiques. Je sais qu'un excellent travail qui est déjà fait pour les espèces, notamment pour les tortues marines, les cétacés, etc., grâce à votre effort et l'effort de l'INSTM et Réseau national d'échouage. Je pense qu'à un certain moment, il faut penser aussi à faire des réseaux et faire l'implication du maximum de personnes dans ces travaux de surveillance, euh, parce que le suivi sous l'eau des habitats, c'est un peu plus complexe et ça nécessite une capitalisation des moyens et une synergie de l'effort. Je pense que on a déjà commencé avec ce workshop parce que en discutant avec les collègues des PAPRAC, on a compris que beaucoup de données qui sont collectées par le SPARAC, et bien sûr en appuyant les pays méditerranéens, servent à d'autres objectifs écologiques et d'autres indicateurs. Je pense que cette façon de collaborer et d'intégrer et de collaborer, ça peut toujours aider. La Tunisie, actuellement, dans le cadre du projet EcAp MED Plus, on est en train d'actualiser l'IMAP national. Et je pense qu'une des recommandations, c'est de faire un IMAP qui est intégré, que lorsqu'on travaille sur les habitats, on est en train de collecter des informations utiles pour l'objectif écologique 7 ou 8. Je pense, c'est la meilleure façon d'avoir des données qui sont collectées, parce que la collecte de données coûte énormément d'efforts et de moyens qui ne sont pas toujours disponibles. Et je pense que c'est un des moyens pour avoir ces données. Et je laisse la parole à Marco pour donner aussi son avis et une réponse possible pour cette question. Go ahead, Marco.
Thank you very much, Yassine. I think you stole my suggestion. I would be very practical, and I would refer to what Samar has presented earlier as a EcAP Plus project. You know that, as Yassine said, national integrated monitoring and assessment program is one of the major outputs deliverable for all eligible countries. And I think this is the place where scientific community should be involved, either through scientific committee for this project or through other channels, because the IMAP will define not only what has to be done according to the methodologies, but also who will do what. And I think there is a very clear link to the preparation of IMAP, national IMAP, but also then to the implementation, which will require, and according to the priorities, you will definitely see which are the missing elements to implement the national IMAP in this document. And I think this is the way where you can integrate and put your efforts and contribute to the preparation and then implementation of national IMAP.
Thank you.
Many thanks for you. Yes.
Thank you, Alpha. Thank you, Marco. I have one question to Anis, since I think in a couple of days you will launch the new report on the situation of fisheries in the Mediterranean and Black Sea. If there is any, do you think that, I'm sure that there is relevant data, relevant information for for the IMAP and also for the next MED QSR. And I think it's a very nice opportunity now if you can share with us some information regarding the new report.
Thank you, Tim. I will not spoil what will be in the SOMFI 2025, but I highly encourage the participation to the launch of the SOMFI, which will be next Friday. I can even share the link in the chat. It's possible to attend online, but there will be a lot of very good information and a lot of new information also. The analysis is progressing. This is the same for MED-QSR, but now the SOMFI. Just to remind to everyone at GFSM level, this is our flagship report published every 2 years. So it's allows between, the life cycle of the MED-QSR that will be now probably adopted for 6 years at COP. Every 2 years, the status on fisheries and aquaculture is there. There are quite linked thematics like for vulnerable species, for vulnerable marine ecosystem, but it's very well detailed. And let's see, starting from next Friday, you will get the new information, and this will be quite helpful for the next phase of the EcAp and the IMAP. So I'll be sharing the link also in the chat.
Thank you, Anis, for sharing the information, and for sure we'll follow this new SOMFI. And I don't know who was first. Yes, please go.
Okay, thank you, Anis, for this information. It's great to see you in this meeting. And please share with us the link in the chat. This is also one of the objectives of this meeting, or of this series of meetings, to exchange information about the upcoming events. I'm sure the report on SOMFI will be very helpful in even the preparation of the national IMAPs that is upcoming. I wanted also to highlight that we have some questions and some comments in the chat. The first one from Layla. She's Layla Aktari from NSTM Tunisia, and she's asking, in your opinion, what would be the impact of seaweed cultivation on the coastal integrity? And if you think there will be any positive or negative data. Maybe she can explain more her question. Another question from Sahbi Durai from ONG in Tunisia, the man, saying thank you for everyone for the presentation. And they have a question for PAP-RAC. I will say it in French. Peut-on considérer l'ajout de sable sur les plages comme cela a été réalisé en Tunisie ces dernières années dans le cadre de
consider the adding of sand on beaches as it was achieved in Tunisia a few years ago in the framework.
Laurent Guérin and Maya Furt for their very nice words and in the chat.
Marco, do you consider this?
Yeah. I was waiting for the
Marco.
To answer to the
Oui,
question of,
je voulais justement répondre aux questions. Donc, ajoutant
for the recreational purposes is a very common activity, because of the erosion when we have sandy beaches, and this happens in many countries. But in the discussion for the definition of the elements for Common Indicator 16 on coastline, the countries decided not to include this element, as an element to be considered as artificial. So the countries decided not to include this adding of sand for the beaches, replenishment. What is the correct word? I don't remember now at the moment. But yeah, this was excluded. So, and the process, it's not that we decide, what to include. We can only propose, and the guidance fact sheet has been decided, and countries are reporting according to the elements that were considered to be artificial structures, and this adding of sand is not considered as artificial structure. So, this would be the answer. Thank you.
C'est vrai que ça n'a pas été considéré comme
It's correct.
un
This was
point
not considered as
pour
being
les indicateurs en relation avec
an aspect
le
to
15
be
et le 16,
included
mais je
with
pense que ça peut
indicators
être
15 and
considéré
16. However, it
pour
could be considered
les indicateurs de la biodiversité EU6, parce qu'on sait que
for indicators
pour
related to
certaines zones, ça
biodiversity
constitue un
EU6,
impact sur les
because
habitats
we know that
en
this
termes
could be an
d'apport de
impact on the
sédiments
habitat
sur
in some
les
areas
herbiers, etc. Donc,
in terms of
je pense que ça peut
impact
être
on the
intégré
Posidonia.
c'est intégré de façon indirecte dans
I
l'IMAP
think this
pour
is
le suivre de
indirectly
l'impact
integrated within
indirect.
IMAP, and this is an indirect follow-up, let's say, or monitoring.
Ivan, please.
Yes, thank you. Just to reflect on Sahbi's question and Marco's
Merci.
answer.
Juste pour complémenter.
There was a first, let's say, one of the first discussions on all the potential indicators for coast and hydrography. This indicator was considered but decided not to be included. I think this was for the several reasons. One reason is that usually the artificial structures are something more permanent and more easily distinguished when observing, for example, satellite images where you actually do the implementation of the indicators. In the beaches, if you observe the beach in the satellite image, you are not sure whether this beach is in the natural state or is artificially nourished. You need to have some very detailed data, which is not observed only by observing the image. And also, it is very important in which period of year this image was taken, because the beach has its own natural dynamics. In winter, it's a bit less wide. In spring, it's more wide. So it's very hard from a simple aerial observation to distinguish whether this is because of the beach nourishment or this is because of some natural dynamics. But I understand the question, and it's I think very important topic, because from many examples in Mediterranean, but also in my own country, in Croatia, sometimes the beach nourishment practices are not really done in a way that they should be done. For example, sometimes the material that is used is not the same as the natural material, and then you have the issues that I mentioned about turbidity and so on. I think what is very important for all the countries is to develop some sort of guidelines of how to perform beach nourishment in a proper way. I mean, there is no proper way, but in a way that the impact on the marine environment would be minimal. In Croatia, there was one law on maritime the domain which wanted to how to say to regulate this, and there was a sort of a scientific study behind which made which kind of percentage of material should be of this size and which percent of material should be on that side. So it's much more detailed and technical that can be simply observed by the indicator proposed in IMAP. But of course, very important, because usually for the touristic purposes, the beach nourishment will not disappear in the future. It will just increase, in my opinion, to accommodate more people. The beach tourism is increasing in Mediterranean. So I think it's much more important to countries to bring some kind of regulation of how to do it in a proper manner. But as Marco said, this is not part of IMAP. Thank you.
Thank you. Ivan, yeah, Maya, please.
Hello, everyone. In fact, I had a question for Ivan, because I am currently working on nature-based solutions. And so I wondered what was your opinion on considering beach nourishment as a nature-based solution, because it depends, in fact, of authors and and of countries. So, yeah, what do you think about that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good and difficult question, because in a one way you mimic nature, you know, by creating a beach, which is a natural element, but with that amount of human intervention, it's very difficult to put it in a box. I know that IUCN relatively recently had a sort of it's an output where you can sort of check whether some intervention can be considered nature-based or not. And they have even different degrees. It's not always nature-based solution. There is also nature-inspired solution and so on. So I would have to check, for example, in this IUCN categorization, whether it's considered nature-based or not. In my personal opinion, considering the impact that it can have and considering the magnitude it can be, you know, sometimes it's done with a heavy machinery or whatever. I wouldn't consider it, but this is just my personal, you know, idea. According to some, how to say, prerequisites, maybe it is. You know. Thank you.
You have another hand.
Yeah. We have two hands. I don't know the first. Pilar, you can start, please.
Yeah. First, just I apologize because I lost most of the presentation because I had to attend another meeting. But first, to react on the event mentioned to the IUCN standard. Yeah, there is an MBS global standard that measures in some way how different interventions or actions are adhered or not to the MBS concept defined by IUCN. It's a global standard that any activity can apply, okay, to check how they adhere or not. Also, in this line of the conversation, I wanted to mention that in one of the projects that we are collaborating, the Red Coast project, this kind of natural-based solutions are related to how to better manage sediments in order to keep the coast in the most natural condition, okay, are used. So I encourage you to visit the way that the University Politécnica, Universidad Politécnica de Cataluña, the work that they are doing on that, because it's a good approach. I mean, but also consider a natural-based solution for avoiding the effects of the big storms in the eastern coast of the Spanish mainland, basically in the Ebro Delta, which is very affected by the loss of sediments from the upstream and how it is connected to the coast, etc., etc. So that's the first one, and then I would like to table a question on how the different ecological objectives and indicators are going to be connected to the indicators that are expected to measure the progress from the global biodiversity framework targets. It's a connection between them or not yet, because maybe I'm going one step beyond of the reality, but I'm curious about that. And the third question is about, in one of the first slides that you shared this morning, you talk about measures and actions required to achieve the global and the good environmental status. Was about the understanding of the effects of climate change on seabed communities, right? And so I was wondering if this understanding of the effects of climate change is also related to the capacity of the different habitats to capture carbon in terms of carbon sequestration, not only looking at the common suspects like Posidonia or wetlands, but also looking beyond, like the marine animal forest, for instance.
Thank you, Pilar. You know, climate change is very difficult thing to tackle. It was a very big challenge to integrate climate change to the IMAP. And I will recommend you a document that Maya Food prepared for SPARAC is to how to integrate climate change and where climate change could be included in the IMAP. I can share with you this document, and you know the IMAP is building and the GES definition was built on to keep habitat and species at let's say at without no change in distribution, no change, but in climate change and in very changing period like what's happened now in the Mediterranean, it's impossible to keep the species and everything in place without changing, because it's very changing issue. I can share with you this document prepared by Maya and take this opportunity to thank her for this document. Regarding the global framework, etc., you know, for the SPARAC also we have this sub-bio strategy, and within the sub-bio strategy we are trying to have this global framework and to integrate everything within the sub-bio, and the next years we have this evaluation also, and I think it will be done through the sub-bio issue. If I can, Evangelia, if you want to ask your question. We are not hearing you. No. I think, Samara, we can take this opportunity to make the group photo, waiting for.
Yes, Yassine, if we don't have any more questions, let's all open our cameras and have a nice group photo.
You can do it, Samara.
Let's take many shots and see which one will work better.
Okay.
So can we say Jess instead of cheese?
It's okay.
Khouloud, c'est bon? Ben yes.
Thank you, Khouloud. We are on time. Thank you, colleagues, for this good workshop. It's a good opportunity to see you all, and also to discuss on IMAP outside the common meeting and all this official meeting. Is the idea is to make the ecosystem approach and IMAP more comprehensive and to integrate everyone on the this GES and good environmental statute. Thank you, colleagues, for SPARAC here, and some of you have to.
Nothing to add, but to thank you, Yassine, Marco, Ivan, and David for the presentation today. One final thank you also to our dear interpreters. I know it can be a bit harder online, and it's without pauses, etc. So many thanks to you and to the participants. And it was a very nice discussion also by the end of this meeting. Hoping to meet you all in person somewhere in this huge Mediterranean sea. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Yassine, regarding the records, are you going to share them shortly?
Yeah. So we will share with you the presentation and also the record. And thank you, Pilar. I can also share the document prepared by Maya regarding the IMAP and climate change. It would be useful also to have an idea on that. Thank you, Pilar, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you very much, everybody, and take care.
Thank you all.